It's Kirsten here. Welcome to another episode of Weekly Hope. I'm so glad that you're joining us this Wednesday at noon Eastern time, but wherever you are in the world and whatever time it is for you, we are so glad that you are here. Before I welcome our guest and we dive into our conversation today, I want to do what I always do at the beginning of this show, which is tell you a little bit about what we do here and what this broadcast, this Facebook Live, is all about. So Weekly Hope is a Facebook Live interview series that we do mostly every week. Sometimes we take some breaks because breaks are always good. But every week we're here discussing with a wide variety of experts from across the field of mental health and eating disorders, topics that are applicable to the recovery process. Every week we talk about something a little bit different, and we've got usually a wide range of people that are here on the show, from clinicians, authors, nonprofit leaders, people with their own recovery stories. But the goal is just to get them on this Facebook Live, to talk with them about an issue that they're passionate about, and ultimately at the end of the day provide you with resources, with a venue to be able to listen, become more educated about this topic, and of course, most importantly, to get some hope and inspiration. The recovery process for an eating disorder can be long and challenging, but the most important thing for us to remember always is that you are not alone in this process, and that there are resources available to help you, like this one, and of course that recovery is possible. And that is the overarching message of everything that we do here. And so I hope that this is a meaningful time for you. And of course, I always ask our viewers to please let us know in the comments where you're signing in from. Tell us your name, say hello. And at any time throughout the show, if you want to ask a question, you've got something on your mind, just type it right there in the comments. I can see everything. I will ask our guests if you've got a question for them that you want answered, something really on your mind, don't hesitate to ask. And what is so beautiful about the comment section usually of the Facebook Live is that often people bring up something that's on their heart. Other people then say, oh my goodness, I have the same question, or I'm experiencing the same thing in my recovery process or in my family, and there ends up being this really amazing, cool support system even within just the comment section. So that being said, if you've got something on your heart, share it, because it might not just be helpful for you, but it also might be helpful for someone else. So, or if you just want to say hi, I always enjoy it when people say hi too. So that is a little bit about Weekly Hope. And now I would like to introduce our guest, and I will bring her onto screen right now. So we wait for her to pop up here. Hold on. Should be coming here in a second. Sorry, guys. Stay tuned. We can hear her, but we can't hear her. Not quite yet. Hold on, everyone. Stay with me for a second. I'm going to reload the page, and then hopefully we'll get Nicole up here. Okay, so just...
Yay!
Yeah, wonderful. So here is Nicole Siegfried. She is a PhD and certified eating disorder specialist. Hi, Nicole. It's great to see you.
Hi, good to see you.
Yeah, so before we jump into our topic today, which you can see along the bottom of the screen, is the importance of relationships in eating disorder recovery. I want to read everyone a little bit of your bio so that they can know your area of expertise and where you're coming from. So Dr. Nicole Siegfried, as I mentioned, she's a licensed clinical psychologist and a certified eating disorder specialist. She's a recognized leader in the field of eating disorders and serves as the Chief Clinical Officer at Alsana. She's currently an adjunct associate professor at the University of Alabama in Birmingham and has also served as associate professor of psychology at Stanford University. Nicole is an international presenter in the field of eating disorders and suicide and a member of the Academy of Eating Disorders and former co-chair of the Suicide AED Special Interest Group. Nicole has almost 20 years of experience working with patients with eating disorders and helping transform their lives. And we are very lucky to have her on. So thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.
So let's talk about relationships. Tough, hard, but beautiful and wonderful and satisfying and essential to eating disorder recovery. So when we chatted a little bit before about your passion for this topic, you identified 3 areas, 3 different kinds of relationships that are important to talk about. Self, with peers, and then with something bigger than yourself. But before we dive and jump right into that, first I want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about the work you do at Alsana, because you're a busy woman, and as I mentioned from your bio, very, very respected in this field, and Alsana is lucky to have you. But tell us a little bit about Alsana if people are interested and what you do on a daily basis.
Yes, great. Well, so I'm the Chief Clinical Officer for Alsana, and we have locations in California. That's where I am right now. I'm actually usually out of Alabama, but I'm visiting California right now. So we are in California, Missouri, and Alabama. And we are a company of eating disorder treatment centers that are helping individuals with eating disorders transform their lives on a daily basis. And so we follow what we call the adaptive care model, which is a model that we've created specific to Alsana that really, we believe, meets clients where they are in meeting their needs across these 5 dimensions, which include medical, nutrition, therapy, and movement, but then also relational. And we see that really as the heart of the work that we do and the heart of the recovery process. So I'm really excited to be able to talk about that today.
Really wonderful. Cool. Thank you for sharing. And we actually had one of your colleagues, Brian Cook, on. You mentioned movement in the 5 different dimensions. And if anyone is interested in hearing more from about the treatment philosophy at Alsana and particularly movement, you can check out one of our previous broadcasts. They're all on our videos page on Facebook, but they're also on our YouTube channel, on the Eating Disorder Hope YouTube channel. You can check out Brian Cook's on movement and recovery. It was a really, really brilliant one.
Yes.
Yeah. So Nicole, first let's start out with the relationship with yourself. It can get very, very distorted, and it's very easy to, for those people struggling with eating disorders, to feel like the eating disorder voice and their voice is the same voice. And people can completely lose themselves. What is the process for someone trying to discover themselves again if they have no idea where to start?
Well, first of all, I love that that's what you started with, because I think that it's so important for us to develop that relationship as part of the recovery process, and it's often overlooked. And so we often, and this is a little bit cliche, but I think it's true, that in order to really have full relationship with others, we first have to have a relationship with self. And sometimes it's kind of tricky. Sometimes that happens through relationship with others in the recovery process. But I think often when we think about relationships, we think outward, and it starts inward. So when we talk about a relationship with self, the first thing that I think about in working with our clients is really beginning the process of self-compassion. I feel like when I talk about that, like if clients are watching right now, they're hanging up. They're like, oh no, I don't want to hear about that again, because it's a difficult process. And I talk about it as a practice, not as an attribute or a characteristic, but something that is practiced because it is very foreign to those individuals in recovery. Like you said, it's very common for individuals with eating disorders to have a very critical internal dialogue. And this really blocks the development of self or the uncovering of self, I suppose. And it really blocks a healthy or fulfilling relationship with self. So the process of developing that relationship, and we think about it from sort of the inside out, we think about it as a process of internal parenting, which sounds kind of strange. But what I mean by that is we all have this internal voice. And that voice is often sort of a critical parent voice for many people with eating disorders. And as part of the recovery process, we really try to help clients develop an internal, again, I know that sounds strange, but an internal parenting voice that really self-soothes, meets your needs, that creates structure and compassion. I mean, that's what we think of as a good parent. And many times, just as part of human development, that process develops very naturally. But for individuals with eating disorders, something often goes awry, and we develop sort of this internal, critical, punitive parent. And that's part of the process that needs to be restored and as part of recovery.
So you mentioned the word self-compassion, and it is talked about a lot, but I think a lot of people outside of the field of eating disorders or just mental health generally, hear like self-compassion, like, ugh, that's such a millennial word. Or, what people need to work harder. People need to stop being so sensitive. There can be some backlash toward this.
Yes.
Can you define self-compassion, what it is and what it is not, for people who might have the wrong idea?
Yes. Self-compassion is an internal empathy, basically. And it also has aspects of self-love and self-structure. So I think of it as having two parts. So it's not, and I would be one of those people that have that reaction that you're talking about. If someone talks about self-compassion, I think if I would have just heard about that and not really studied it, I would be like, oh my gosh, this is just like letting people off the hook, do what you want. And it there feels something sort of threatening about that, that meaning that if I do that, I'm just going to just all caution to the wind, and I'm just going to not have any structure to my life. And that's not at all what it is. It's not self-pity. It is not feeling sorry for yourself. It is not letting yourself off the hook. It is creating that internal parent that I was talking about that has love, empathy, and structure. And that's the way that I think of self-compassion.
Yeah, it's so good.
So there's 3 steps to the practice of self-compassion, and that's what helps me describe it sometimes to clients, because as I said, I think clients sometimes when we talk about this can start to feel a little bit anxious as to what self-compassion really means. And is it going to be that they just, like I said, like throw all caution to the wind and have no anchor points in their lives? So Kristen Neff is one of the experts in self-compassion and has written a book, I think it's called Self-Compassion. And she talks about 3 steps in the practice. And the first step is mindfulness. And this isn't like sitting on the beach, like mindfulness. I mean, but it is this recognition and objectivity of what it is that you're going through. So it might be, okay, this is a recognition of Nicole. Right now you're experiencing emotional pain. That would be mindfulness. Then the second aspect of it is and this is the connection piece, even in self-compassion, is this recognition that you're not alone, that she calls it common humanity, meaning that pain, emotional pain, is part of the human condition. Not maybe that everybody's gone through exactly what I've gone through, but other people have experienced pain. So I'm not alone in this. And then the third is self-kindness. And when we talk about self-kindness, we're not talking about like taking a bubble bath and getting a massage. I mean, that could.
Although that is wonderful.
It is. Yes. I highly recommend that. But what it is more of the way that you talk to yourself about this, so that you say, this is really difficult. And what I say to myself as part of self-compassion is like, this is really hard. And Nicole, I feel really bad for you right now that you're having to go through this. And the same thing that I would say to one of my children or to my dog, it's interesting, we can't say those things to ourselves, but they're often things that we say to others. And so that's what the practice is. And so practicing that, it starts to then develop a little bit more self-love and a little bit more structure, internal structure.
Yeah, so good. And I love that you use the word practice, because it's not something that happens overnight. And even people who don't struggle with eating disorders or other mental health issues have to practice this as well. We all do. Right?
Absolutely. This is not something that's just specific to eating disorders.
Yeah. So let's move on to relationships with others,
Okay.
our peers, family, friends, support system, etc. What are some of the most challenging relationships with people outside of ourselves, um,
Mhm.
for those, especially those recovering from an eating disorder?
Well, relationships are so difficult for our clients anyway because they are the main relationship that they have is with their eating disorder. And so when they come into treatment, many of their relationships have been damaged. They feel very misunderstood by people in their families or even their peers. That's very common. So there's a lot of relationship healing that has to happen. And when you're saying, what are the most difficult, I don't even know if I could rank them. I would just say that I would say family relationships can be very difficult because the eating disorder takes a toll, not just on our clients, but the families as well. And so a lot of clients who come in have fractured relationships with their families that need to be healed as part of this process. But I would say that it's six of one, half a dozen of another. I think that other times people will come in and say it's their marriage, or so I think it's almost no relationship goes unscathed in this process.
Yeah. Let's say someone is dealing with a family member, because sometimes family members can be really supportive. And a lot of times at treatment centers, families are involved, sometimes in therapy sessions, and some parents can be super on board.
Yes.
Sometimes some family members are not.
Sure.
How can a person discharging from treatment or in the recovery process try to explain or convey what they might be going through? And if they can't, and if that person is just too toxic, how do they separate themselves so they can stay healthy?
Oh, that's such a good question. So I sometimes think that one of the things that we'll do with clients and their loved ones that they're in relationship with, one of the things that we do in treatment is to help them develop a language for speaking to one another. So sometimes it's not just the client that needs some of that training on, like, how can you best explain this to your loved one? We talk about, and I know this is a little bit cliche, but it's important. We talk about I statements instead of leading with, you never are there for me, and you don't understand, that's going to set up a barrier before you've even had time to try to help them understand what it is you're going through. So trying to use more I statements of, this whole thing has made me feel so sad. This whole thing is made, even if it's things like, I feel angry. You can claim whatever emotion it is, but talking more about how it impacts you rather than pushing it on the parent or the loved one. But the other thing is that we do a lot of training. We use emotion-focused family therapy at Alsana. So we do a lot of training with our families as well because they don't know. Like, I hope families are watching right now, because I have so much empathy for you guys, because you're probably thinking, I'm always saying the wrong thing. It doesn't matter what I say. It feels like it's always the wrong thing. And so we help you to be able to use validation statements. And when I say validation, that doesn't mean that you agree with everything that your loved one is saying, but using statements of validation so that they can feel heard by you. So that's some of the work that we do with the families, specifically on their end, to help them with some of that language. But we also do that with clients as well. So part of what I do with clients, not just me, we all do with clients, is help them understand the purpose of some of this communication and what they want from the relationship. So it could be that they've recognized, I may not be able to get what I thought I needed or wanted from my mother, let's say, but maybe there are other things that I can get from her that still make this relationship fulfilling. And so there may be a grieving process that clients need to go through, recognizing that maybe, what I wanted from my relationship wasn't something that I could get. But there may be also healing in recognizing, but there are other things that I can get from this relationship. And so that's a lot of the work that we do as well.
That is so, so good, Nicole. I'm just like amening everything you're saying. For a family member or a friend or a spouse who is supporting someone coming back from treatment, you mentioned the I statements, which is so good, getting support themselves. What about boundaries for both the client and the family member?
I love that. I'm so glad you brought that up because that's such an important piece. And setting boundaries is part of self-compassion. That is actually, it seems like that's external work, but it is also creating internal structure. So I use this phrase sometimes. I actually got this from a colleague of you can't continue to go to Home Depot to get milk. What I mean by this is that a relationship you may be wanting something from a relationship that it can't give, right? And you keep going. And it sometimes can be difficult because you may have a relationship with someone where it's like there's a sign out front in front of Home Depot that says milk for sale. And then you get in there and it's not for sale. I mean, so relationships can be confusing. So I understand that. But at some point, and this is what setting a boundary would be. And I use this with clients to say, when are you going to recognize you're not going to be able to get milk from Home Depot? And setting the boundary may be that you aren't going to go back to Home Depot, or it may be that you realize that you're able to get hammers and nails and duct tape, I don't know, whatever, from Home Depot, and that is enough to continue the relationship and it makes it worthwhile. Or it may be that you decide that I'm not going to keep going, or I'm not going to go to Home Depot. Right now, I need someone who's going to be able to give me compassion, and that's not going to be, I've realized that's not my boyfriend. So I'm going to call my friend, so that's setting boundaries. That doesn't sound like the way we talk about boundaries, but that is a boundary of saying, when I need this kind of support, I'm not going to go to you. I'm going to go to someone else.
Yeah, so good.
So that's one example.
Yeah. And how about for loved ones, let's say a friend, because if you're a spouse,
yes.
Yeah. Every relationship is going to be different, but what are some boundaries that a friend maybe should set?
Absolutely. It's the same kind of thing. And so again, I think when we think about boundaries, we think about sort of this tough love thing where it's like, at some point we are going to say she cannot come home anymore or whatever, if she continues with this eating disorder. And maybe that things sometimes get to that level where families have to set those kinds of boundaries. But when I'm talking about boundaries as well, it can be things like, okay, I'm not going to, when you ask me, is this food safe? Or you ask me, do I look fat in this? I'm not going to answer those questions. That's a boundary. Yeah. So those are things that you can still, parents can talk about. It doesn't have to be parents, friends, whoever, to say, these are the things that I'm comfortable continuing conversation about. And these are the things that I'm going to, draw a line around. I'm not going to answer those questions. That's a boundary.
Yeah, that's so good. And it's so important for loved ones to have those boundaries as well, because if they're not mentally, emotionally healthy themselves,
right,
making sure that they're protected, then they're not going to be able to help support
exactly
their loved one. Let's move on to that third element of relationship that we talked about at the beginning. And that's the relationship. You talked about it as with something bigger than yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you mean by that?
So here we think about this as this can be something spiritual. So this can be a higher purpose or a higher power, or this could even be something religious if people come from a religious background that really meets these needs. But this is something we feel that gets very neglected in the recovery process. So there's been research that shows that if you interview people who are fully recovered, that many of them say one of the things that was most important to me in my recovery process was finding something outside of myself, that whether it was something spiritual, a higher purpose, or something that created a life worth living for me, kind of thing. they talk about that, but we feel like it's often neglected in the treatment process. So this is something we've been very intentional about, is how to integrate that. What is it that sort of makes your heart beat? What is it that is the thing that you love? And how do you turn things over? Also, this is sort of the spiritual piece, turn things over. Like, this is sort of an AA statement of you letting go of the things that you can't control. That is part of this as well, is turning things over to, if people say God or a higher power or whatever that may be. So there's this aspect of the relational work can take on a variety of different flavors, so to speak. We look at it too as, you and I talked about this yesterday, like even creating some kind of advocacy work is something here that can be a part of creating relationships and community outside of the eating disorder. And so in creating a purpose around that. So in creating meaning, I always love Viktor Frankl. I don't know if people are familiar with Viktor Frankl. I love, if you haven't read Man's Search for Meaning, read it. But finding meaning in the things that have happened. And he was able to survive a concentration camp with that philosophy. And so applying that to the recovery process, or even the tragedies that occur in our lives, really is a relational aspect of this recovery and of treatment.
I feel so strongly about this. I also didn't find a huge motivation to recover until there was something I wanted more.
Yes.
That I realized I couldn't have that and my eating disorder.
Yes, agreed.
If there was a bigger life that I wanted, there were future relationships that I wanted, a husband, who knows, maybe children one day. I was 16 at this point, and like to travel the world and to, have a good relationship with God. For me, it was God, and all these things that I wanted so desperately, and I just saw were completely incompatible with my eating disorder. I either choose to be in a relationship with an eating disorder or have a life.
Right.
And I feel so strongly that we have to have something that motivates us beyond just like, oh, I have to get to this end point of recovery. No. You have to recover for something beyond that.
Yes. Yes.
I
think this is Carolyn Costin who said this. If I'm misquoting, it may be somebody else, but she had always talked about having something to recover to. And I love that. We talk about recovering from the eating disorder. I just gave myself chills. But like recovering to something, and I'm recovered as well. And so I really identify with what you said of there was something that was more powerful to me and something that drew me toward wanting a different life that was much different than the life I could have with an eating disorder. And so I needed something to recover to. And I love that idea.
Yeah. I want to ask you too, what motivation or how would you speak to someone who, because I know the tendency and temptation to isolate, not only for someone who's struggling, but in recovery, because it's awkward and your body's changing and you feel awkward. And then you're afraid of the looks and comments and questions that people might give you. Oh, you look so healthy. You look so good. And you're like, oh, that's the last thing in the world I want to hear. No, because recovery is hard. And people might say triggering things. So the tendency is to isolate, but eating disorders thrive in isolation. Correct. Community is so healing. How would you encourage someone who's watching to burst out of that isolation bubble?
Oh, yes. Well, so first of all, I have to think about it as dipping your toe more than bursting. Okay. So good. Bursting feels like I'm pretending, but that feels so scary. So and bold. And if you can burst for sure. But if you even start to dip your toe a bit, that is progress. So I have this analogy sometime, and I don't know where this came from, but I sometimes imagine like being in your eating disorder, like being like it doesn't have to be a princess, but in my imagination, it's being a princess in a tower. And so you are safe. I don't know where this came from, but I sometimes imagine this weird happen.
Sorry, yeah. Go ahead. Sorry, Facebook just.
Okay, I know I did something.
We're having both streams going at the same time.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Okay. So but you're safe there, and so you're safe from the dragons and whatever it may be up in this tower. But you're also so isolated and lonely, and so I want to validate for clients, like, it's understandable why you want to climb up in the tower, and so that makes sense, and that's part of the eating disorder. But I have this image of, like, sometimes climbing down and how unsafe it has to feel and threatening to be out in the woods, and not understanding, how to navigate that when your space is so small with the eating disorder in your little tower, but how lonely the life would be there. So it might be that you climb down and step around in the woods, so to speak, and then you climb back up, and that is okay. That's part of dipping your toe at first. So that's what I would recommend, is that doing something small that may be a little bit outside of your comfort zone, and then building on that. So it might be that, at first, if it was something where someone, invited you to a support group, and in the past you'd be like, nope, going back up to my tower, that you would say, okay, I'm going to do that. I don't have to do it next week. I'm just going to do it this week, so that'd be an example of dipping your toe. And it may be that you spend the rest of your time in the tower for the next few days, with the goal eventually being that you'd be out and among the people.
And I would say that that's probably also an opportunity to practice self-compassion. If you go and you're like, woo, that was tough, to take the next 3 days and be in the tower, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
And Rebecca says hi, and I just want to say hi, Rebecca. It's great to see you here. Thanks for joining us. And we just got a few more minutes with Dr. Siegfried, and now we've got some people that have come in and out. So if you have a question that you want to ask, now is definitely the time to do that. I just want to say something, just a little addendum to what you said, because it was so good. Also, in relationships are the chance that we have the opportunity to practice what we learn with our therapist or with our dietitian.
For sure.
Because you can't learn how to have self-compassion, self-love, positive body image, a strong sense of self, if you don't practice it. And what is a great, being in relationship with people and hearing their comments, hearing things you disagree with, maybe someone not saying something right way, being around foods you don't like, that's your opportunity to practice when that happens. Like, we can't just do recovery alone. Recovery and healing has to take place in the context of the real world as well. And so those opportunities to dip your toe, I feel like we should see them as challenges. Like, this is my challenge. I'm going to meet these obstacles head on, and I'm going to be successful.
Yes.
Like, I'm going to feel the emotions. I'm going to do this so that next time it's easier. And just like you practice self-compassion, you practice going into these difficult relationships, hearing the comments or seeing the looks or feeling the vibe and being okay, no matter what.
Right.
So what I want to ask you to give, because you're so full of light and wisdom and so encouraging to hear you, that I want to ask you to encourage two sets of people who might be watching.
Okay.
The first is, if there's a parent or a loved one who's watching this, either right now or later when they watch on our YouTube channel, what encouragement would you give a parent of a loved one struggling at the moment?
Well, first, I might say the same thing to loved ones and individuals, and that is to never give up hope. And I believe that hope is so important, not just for our clients, but for the families. And so I feel like it's part of our responsibility as clinicians to bring that hope to families and their loved ones. And I know that families get very beaten down by this as well, and that it's not just something that affects our clients, but I hope that our families can also be these beacons of hope. There's something that's called, and it's really cool, it's called hope bonding, which is one of the ideas of what happens in a therapy relationship. And the idea is that the connection that develops is actually sort of these strands of hope between the therapist and the client. And it's this idea, like what we say to clients oftentimes is, let me hold the hope until you can hold it yourself. And that's basically what it is. And so I'm going to hold this hope until you can start to feel it. And if families can, I keep getting chills, but if families can do that too, it just feels like that would be such a a pool of hope for our clients to draw on. And I feel bad in saying that to families, because I know that you sometimes need someone to hope bond to you as well, that's the job of clinicians. But if you can bring that to your loved ones, that it gives them more of a chance to feel like this could be possible, that recovery could be possible.
Such wonderful words. Nicole, thank you so much for your time, for your wisdom, and for all of the great work that you do at Elsana, you and the whole team. It's so cool to meet someone who is like literally a lifesaver every single day.
Thank you for saying that.
Truly. Yeah, you're so welcome. So we'll say goodbye. Have a wonderful time in California. Enjoy the sun.
Yes. Thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
All right. Bye, Nicole. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. We so enjoyed having you here, and I hope that this was helpful for you, whether you are an individual in recovery or a family member or a friend. And because this was so focused on, how do we support people? How do we heal relationships with ourselves? And how do we get out of ourselves and develop a relationship with something bigger than us? This could potentially be very helpful to someone that you know in your life. So just want to encourage you, share this. It will be here on the Eating Disorder Hope Facebook page, on our videos page, as well as I mentioned, on our YouTube channel, our Eating Disorder Hope YouTube channel. But please feel free to share this. These are free resources, and we just want to help you wherever you might be. So feel free to share. And wherever you may be watching, just know, like Nicole said, that there absolutely is hope. And if you are a loved one or a parent, please reach out for help yourself. You need support too in this process. You are not alone. So reach out for resources. We have tons of resources on eatingdisorderhope.com, but reach out for help because you need support as well. And as we mentioned before, it's hard to help someone if you're not able to be strong yourself. So support is out there. It just takes reaching out and asking for it. So with that, thank you for joining us for another episode of Weekly Hope. Again, I'm Kirsten. It's been a joy to have you here, and we will see you back next week for another episode. All right. Have a wonderful week. Ciao.